Hi class, today we are going to talk about the lymphatic system, which is chapter 24. Again, your textbook is very detailed about the lymphatic system. We definitely will not have enough time to cover everything. I'll highlight the things that you need for your lecture exam. Okay, starting with some basic functions of the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system involves several organs as well as system of lymphatic cells, lymphatic vessels located throughout the body. Together, these structures transport fluids that help body fight infections. Now, lymphatic system, it not only carries some interstitial fluid, but also it helps our body to fight infections. In this diagram, we see an arterial end of a capillary carrying red blood cells, and when the blood pressure is too high, a lot of interstitial fluid comes out into the tissue space, and usually most of this fluid is drained back into the bloodstream. However, there is always an excess of about 3 liters of liquid in the interstitial space that is carried by the lymphatic capillaries back into the venous system. Therefore, these lymphatic capillaries carry all the extra interstitial fluid back into the bloodstream. The second important function of lymphatic system is to carry lipid and lipid-soluble vitamins. In the intestine, this picture is showing us a diagram of the villi of the small intestine. Now we do see red and blue capillaries, blood capillaries that carry all the nutrients. However, lipids and lipid-soluble vitamins cannot be absorbed by the blood capillaries that easily. Therefore, we have the green lymphatic capillaries called lacteals that carry lipid into our system. So lacteals, remember, they are specialized lymphatic capillaries only found in the small intestine that carry lipids and lipid-soluble vitamins. Another important function of the lymphatic system is to produce lymphocytes that make a lot of antibodies. And as we know, these antibodies fight several infections. Now, components of the lymphatic system. Lymph is the fluid component of the lymphatic system, which does not include RBCs or any other type of white blood cells. It also has lymphatic capillaries. Smaller capillaries join to form lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic vessels join to form lymphatic trunks. Trunks join to form ducts. Ducts join to form then drain things back into the venous system. We will also talk a little bit about different types of lymphatic cells, the B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, that play an important role in immune response. Apart from that, we have some lymphatic structures and lymphatic organs. One thing I want you to understand, lymphatic structures are not lymphatic organs. They are two separate things, and we will talk about those later in this chapter. Now, what is lymph? Lymph is a fluid component which has a lot of dissolved solutes and some foreign materials. In your exam, you might get a question like, what is not found in the lymph? Circle all that apply. Remember, lymph only contains solutes and other foreign materials. You should not expect red blood cells, white blood cells, or other larger proteins in the lymph. Okay, remember that. In this diagram, we are looking at blood capillaries, but we also see some lymphatic capillaries, which are actually slightly thicker than blood capillaries. The diameter of these lymphatic capillaries are thicker than blood capillaries. Now, looking at lymphatic capillaries are made up of overlapping endothelial cells. By overlapping, we mean these cells look like fish scales. And when the blood pressure is too high, some fluid from blood comes out, escapes, and enters the interstitial space. When there is a lot of fluid in the interstitial space, from there, the extra fluid enters the lymphatic capillaries, and these endothelial cells work as one-way valves, allowing the interstitial fluid to move into the lymphatic capillaries. Okay. Also, don't forget lacteals. Those are the lymphatic capillaries found specifically in the small intestine that carry lipid-rich fluid, and the lipid-rich fluid is called chyle. Okay, now this is showing us a picture of lymphatic capillary. We do see interstitial fluid surrounding the lymphatic capillary. Again, when there is a lot of fluid in the interstitial space, they enter the capillary via the overlapping endothelial cells. Those are shown by the green arrows in the diagram. The green arrows represent flow of interstitial fluid from the interstitial space into the lymphatic capillaries. Okay, now smaller capillaries join to form lymphatic vessels. Now, there are certain similarities between lymphatic vessels and blood vessels. If you remember from chapter 23, we mentioned that blood vessels have all three tunics. Lymphatic vessels also have all three tunics, and do you remember we talked about the valves in veins? Lymphatic vessels also have valves. In this diagram, you do see valves present within this lymphatic vessel, and these valves also work by skeletal muscle pump. Okay, now there are some afferent valves and efferent valves. Afferent valves carry lymph towards a lymphatic node, and efferent valve carry lymph away from a lymph node. And these vessels, these lymphatic vessels, join together to form larger lymphatic trunks. In this diagram, we are seeing an efferent lymphatic vessel that is carrying lymph away from the lymph node, and we also see an afferent lymphatic vessel that carries lymph towards the lymph node. So afferent towards, efferent away. The lymphatic vessels join together to form lymphatic trunks. There are 5 important trunks that we will talk about. You only need to know about the names of these trunks and some very basic functions. First, we have left and right jugular trunk. They drain lymph from the head and neck region. The second one is called subclavian trunk that drain from the upper limb. We also have a bronchomediastinal trunk that drain lymph from the deeper thoracic areas. We have a lumbar trunk, left and right lumbar trunk, that drain from the lower limbs. And we also have intestinal trunk that drains lymph from the intestine. So, to review, we have left and right jugular trunk that drain from the head and neck regions. We have left and right subclavian trunk that drain the upper limbs. We have left and right bronchomediastinal trunk that drain the deeper thoracic organs. We have left and right lumbar trunks that drain the lower legs. And we also have intestinal trunk that drains the intestine. These lymphatic trunks join to form lymphatic ducts. And remember, we have 2 lymphatic ducts. We have a right lymphatic duct and we have a thoracic duct. Please do remember that there is no left lymphatic duct. We have a right lymphatic duct and a thoracic duct. And the thoracic duct is the longest duct in the body, and at the distal end of the lymphatic duct, if you notice, there is a sac-like structure called cisternae chyli. Cisternae chyli. This structure receives all the lipids and lipid-soluble vitamins from the intestine. Alright, so we understand what lymph is. We understand the different types of vessels of the lymphatic systems. Now we are moving on to lymphatic cells. There are three main types of lymphatic cells. We have macrophages, dendritic cells, and lymphocytes. Macrophages, we have talked about macrophages before. Macrophages, they come from blood monocyte and they perform something called phagocytosis, meaning they clean up debris and other dead materials. Dendritic cells, if you remember, we talked about these during the integumentary system. Dendritic cells, they are called antigen presenting cells. If they find some antigen, they hold that antigen and present it to other immune cells so that they could elicit an immune response. Dendritic cells by themselves do not kill a foreign antigen. And then we have the most abundant type of the lymphatic system called lymphocytes. So the three important types are macrophages, dendritic cells, and lymphocytes, and all three together, they elicit immune responses. Moving on to the lymphocytes. There are remember one thing, we will briefly talk about the lymphatic cells or lymphocytes here. And when you move on to micro, you will learn a lot more about these lymphatic cells. So there are two types of lymphatic cells. We have T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. These are the two broad classes. T lymphocytes can be of two types. We have helper T lymphocytes and cytotoxic T lymphocytes. And B lymphocytes are of two types. We have plasma cells and memory cells. One thing I want you to understand here is that B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes, those are very, very specific to particular antigens. However, the other type of lymphocyte, they are called NK cells or natural killer cells. These are very, very non-specific. They can work against a variety of antigens and other cancer cells. So the T lymphocytes, they are the most abundant type of lymphocyte. About 70 to 80% of the lymphocytes are T lymphocytes. As I mentioned before, they are very specific to particular antigens. There are two types of T lymphocytes. We have helper T lymphocytes and cytotoxic. Helper T lymphocytes, as the name suggests, they help other immune cells to elicit an immune response. Cytotoxic T lymphocytes, they themselves take care of antigens by killing them. Let's take a look. In this diagram, we on the left hand side, we see a helper T lymphocyte, and the blue speck-like structures that are on the surface, those are called receptors or co-receptors. Helper T lymphocyte has CD4 co-receptors, and that is why they're also known as CD4 cells. Now, we also see a foreign cell with antigens. Do you see that? Now, what is the helper T lymphocyte doing here? The helper T lymphocyte will attack the foreign cell and it will start producing cytokines. At the same time, the helper T lymphocyte will divide by mitosis and produce more helper T lymphocytes. As more and more cytokines are produced, they will stimulate production of other lymphatic cells, as we see on our very right. Therefore, to review, helper T lymphocyte encounters a foreign antigen. As soon as it encounters an antigen, it starts producing cytokine and divides rapidly by mitosis. These cytokines trigger production of other lymphatic cells that ultimately elicit a proper immune response. Good? All right. Moving on to cytotoxic T lymphocytes. This diagram is not on your textbook. This is from a different textbook. Now here in the diagram, we see that there is an infected cell and there is a cytotoxic T cell. Now the cytotoxic T cell binds to the infected cell and it makes holes in the infected cell and it injects some perforin molecules into the infected cells. Eventually the infected cell lyses and That is how the infected cell is destroyed by the cytotoxic T lymphocyte. Therefore, we see that the cytotoxic T lymphocytes and the helper T lymphocytes work very, very differently